Hey everyone, it's Will.
And James. This is our recap for Amazing Race 32, episodes 8 and 9, the MEGALEG.
We're going to talk about our strategy in using the yield.
And double the detours, double the roadblocks, and everything we experienced in India. Before we really dive into the MEGALEG episode, we need to give some context of things that had transpired during our travel to Hyderabad. Because there was a lot that came to fruition.
Yes, and from Hyderabad, we left in first, going to the airport. We went to two different airports. The first one was in Dubai, and at this Dubai beautiful, magnificent airport, we went to Shake Shack to have burgers.
We have to note that this was literally the first time we spoiled ourselves on the race. We were very frugal with every money we received.
But
on
we
every
split a burger.
leg. But that was the joke. Like, we spoiled ourselves, but at the same time, split a meal.
It still spent like $8 on a burger and fries, and like I think we had water, free water. Obviously, Dubai is a little more expensive. Whatever, we splurged a little. But when we sat to eat, we sat with Ishwar and Aparna, and we started talking about the race, how they were feeling, what was going on, the past couple of legs.
Well, the question came up about how we knew that there was one U-turn still looming on an upcoming leg. So we wanted to pick their brains about what their thoughts were when it came to the U-turn.
Yeah. What would you do if you came up to this next yield or the U-turn? Like, who would you do? And Ishwar, love him to death. They're both fantastic. He goes, Hung and Chi are like the biggest threat. Like, I think we would U-turn them. But also you guys. You guys have won a lot. Like, I think you are really, really huge competitors. And me and James are just like,
oh,
I'm sorry.
This is interesting.
You just told us that we're huge threats. When we asked you about a U-turn, whoa, red flag.
So not only did we sit down with Ishwar and Aparna during our layover, we were able to connect with the three, as you've come to know, which is Hung and Chi, the Beards, and us.
Yeah.
The six of us sat down at our gate to really discuss strategies going into the MEGALEG. We assumed that there were going to be double the yields. When it came to the yield strategy, I think we were all in agreement that the plan was to yield Gary and D'Angelo. So for Hung and Chi and the Beards, as you've seen in the episode, they think that Gary and D'Angelo don't really give a lot to the alliance. And Will and I, of course, are like, well, they're also finding their momentum in the race, and they've been performing really well the last couple of legs. So Gary and D'Angelo are definitely a threat, and that's something to keep an eye on.
With the added information of Ishwar and Aparna, or Ishwar in particular, saying that Hung and Chi, we obviously tell Hung and Chi, like, Ishwar and Aparna would potentially U-turn you guys, or us, or yield us if they were to go first. So this, like, not master plan, but plan was put into place of whoever gets there first, use it, regardless of if it's 20 or 10, because Hung and Chi had 10, and either if you feel that Gary and D'Angelo are way behind, yield Gary and D'Angelo. The only other option is to yield Haley and KAYLYNN because they don't have a yield to then use on another team. And so the consensus for the three teams was Gary and D'Angelo are very strong competitors. If we can bump them, give them a little time out, it would help all of us, get further in the race. But obviously that's not what happened.
So hopefully we prefaced going into the MEGALEG some context as to what ultimately transpired. And when we landed in Hyderabad, it was a mad dash to get those taxis, and we were off to do our first task, which was smog check 3 auto rickshaws. And we were the third team to show up. It definitely was pure chaos.
It was very hard to find rickshaws that were empty. A lot of the auto rickshaws had people
Locals
using them as transportation. Yes. Obviously the roads were crowded. You see me yelling at James to get out of the road because he's about to die, and I would say like at least half of the rickshaws were occupied with people. So finding the empty ones while 5 other teams are also trying to find empty ones was a huge challenge.
Yeah.
And then when you bring your rickshaw to the smog inspector to then type in all your little digits for the vehicle number and run the test by putting the pipe in a wand into the exhaust pipe to see if they are polluting the earth. If they give them their certificate, like that process took a lot of time. And once you were done, you still then had to go get another one, and then you may or may not find one quickly, and then you'd come back. So the process for all the teams did take a while.
It did.
But I thought it was really great because you're helping the city. There's 5 million cars in the city, helping them not be polluted as much.
Another thing to mention too, Ishwar and Aparna were first, Gary and D'Angelo were second, we were third, but the fourth team to show up to the auto rickshaw task was Haley and KAYLYNN. And if I remember correctly, I think Will and I had already smog checked one rickshaw, maybe trying to flag down our second, when we finally saw the Beards and Hung and Chi show up. Yeah. So I don't know what happened with their taxis from the airport to this task, but we were practically close to being done. And knowing the information of, oh, Haley and KAYLYNN showed up to the auto rickshaw task before the members of our 3-team alliance, that was something we definitely kept in the back of our minds as we moved forward in this part of the MEGALEG.
Because once teams finished the smog check, you got into your taxi and you went to the detour. You went to do the binary code or the Swiggy app. And I think we automatically knew which teams were going to do what. We knew Ishwar and Aparna were going to do the binary code. Gary and D'Angelo, Gary's a huge gamer. We chose it mainly because we both...
It just sounded fun, too.
Sounded a little bit more fun than trying to navigate through India, and a little more unique than the Swiggy app.
But also I think a lot of rewatching of seasons prior to going on the race, we kind of knew already what that Swiggy app task was going to entail, and we did not want to risk it. We would rather be in control of our own fate, and that was by using our hands and doing a little video.
Our brains. But we definitely knew that the girls, Haley and KAYLYNN, would not come to the video game challenge just because that's just not something that I think they would have chosen.
We knew. We were like, they're absolutely going to the other detour. Yep. But let's talk about the binary code challenge. It was so much fun, and it definitely was a learning curve. It took us 3 attempts to capture all our ones and all of our zeros. Now it's time to crack the code.
It's like that, whatever, the Connect that was for the PlayStation, where you got to like make things happen. And so you just had to move your hands to capture the zeros and ones that were lit up in gold. The first 2 times, I want to say we each missed maybe 1 or 2. Like, we were doing pretty well. The third one, we got all of them. And then all of a sudden there's like 100, 200, 300 numbers on the screen, and you see them. They're not separated in any way. It's just numbers. Mm-hmm. Then you have your coder that has the 6 digits that make up each letter of the alphabet, including a space. And it took a second for you to recognize, oh, group them in 6s or whatever to make letters. And I think our process worked really well for us because you would write them down. I would then take the piece of paper, go through a couple of them while you're writing down additional numbers, and so we kind of had a system.
You already started.
I started writing down the numbers while you were still doing the numbers. Yeah. And so we were able to do it honestly double as fast because I'm going slow doing the numbers to alphabet and you're still writing. Like, we were handing off pretty well.
Divide and conquer.
I got real in my brain and like real focused and like zoned everything out, like very focused.
Once we cracked the code, we made our way to the 4th floor bunker and received our next clue, which told us that we were going to the tombs to find our next clue. And were warned that there was a yield ahead. So the entire way to the tombs in our taxi, Will and I weighed out all the pros and cons when it came to using our yield. We definitely knew we wanted to use it, but it was just a matter of who. Gary and D'Angelo or Haley and KAYLYNN.
Knowing that Gary and D'Angelo were so close behind us, the whole plan of yielding Gary and D'Angelo didn't make sense. Like, it would have just pissed them off and put them in timeout for 20 minutes.
And have the possibility that maybe, just maybe, we mess up in the next challenge, Gary and D'Angelo pass us, and then later on in the MEGALEG, them being ahead of us and yielding us. So we wanted to make sure we did everything we could where there wouldn't be an opportunity for someone to yield us as backlash. So Haley and KAYLYNN definitely made the most sense. And you have to think, we had no idea where they were. All we knew is that they showed up to the auto rickshaw task 4th, ahead of Hung and Chi and Madison and Riley. While we were doing the binary code task, Hung and Chi and the Beard showed up. So the only team we did not see was Haley and KAYLYNN. And that's primarily because we knew that they were going to do the other detour. So now you have to think, 5 out of the 6 teams, the Mine 5, are all doing the binary code task. The only team not there is Haley and KAYLYNN. Not knowing what the other detour entailed, there was a very good possibility that maybe, just maybe, especially with the Queens of Luck, they could totally blow through that challenge.
We had no idea nor way of knowing how they were doing on this leg of the race. And so our decision as we're driving was the only thing that we can do is burn the yield board so that Ishwar and Aparna can't yield Hung and Chi, and that we can burn it and get rid of ours and use it was Haley and KAYLYNN.
Who knew, we didn't know, that they would have such terrible luck with taxis. None of us knew.
The whole idea of the MEGALEG really threw everyone for a loop because you knew there were double the detours, knew there were double the roadblocks, and at this point we had only done one detour. Like, we had so much more of the race, that leg, to do that maybe there was something that we couldn't do. Maybe there was a challenge that we were going to really terribly fail at that was going to put us at the back of the pack. What can help us give a little bit more time to ourselves to then do better while also not pissing anybody off who could then retaliate?
Exactly. We knew that there was one more U-turn at some point in the race. So again, if you take a shot yielding someone and it doesn't work in your favor, then more than likely if that team gets to the U-turn board before you, we very well could get U-turned. So that's just like what we were thinking in that moment when we sadly put our yield on the yield board for Haley and KAYLYNN.
Our goal was not to get Haley and KAYLYNN out.
No.
Like
Not at all.
That was nobody's goal. And that was not our motivation to get rid of them because of this alliance.
Like, they were not a target for us by any means.
It was a way for us to give a little cushion to ourselves just in case we needed it.
So, opening up this roadblock, who wants to flip their lid? I knew that I was down in my roadblock count, so I figured, why not? Like, I've played Pokemon Go. I'm familiar with tech devices. This should be a walk in the park for me. Little did I know it wasn't going to be. I think based on what you saw in one of our interviews on the episode, I understood the basics of this challenge. And that was to find the details in the turbine and then correctly match them on the column at the top as it was underneath. And for some reason, I could not match the column, to say the life of me. You saw how stressed I was getting. I was definitely getting in my head, and it was becoming more frustrating when teams started to show up because, tidbit, we actually had about a 25-minute lead over all the teams. So we were feeling pretty good, but, I mean, I have to own it. Like, I totally blew it.
Yeah, it was hard to watch. I mean, when Ishwar and Aparna showed up, me and Aparna sat there, and Ishwar was also struggling. Me and Aparna, like, had Gatorade. We went to the bathroom. Like, we hung out for a bit. She put on red lipstick, and I'm over there going, come on, James, like, being encouraging. And James would look at me with, like, these devil eyes of, like, I don't get it. So I knew that it was just something that was frustrating. And me and Aparna and everybody else who was just watching, we didn't understand what y'all were doing.
No.
We didn't know what the task was or why some people were having issues. And I think as people finally got it to click in their brain of like the pillars and the turbines, when spots started getting taken, it was a lot easier for all of you to then process, okay, that one's taken, go find that one, and then also look at the one that's next to it to see what it is. And so process of elimination got a little easier as like 3 or 4 had already been selected or put on the pillars. And it was hard to watch, I think, for all of us because you and Ishwar were just,
we were going through it.
I mean, struggling.
Again, it's technology. Granted, there's no one to blame but myself because I clearly was struggling. But technology is not your best friend sometimes. It just added another layer to
great TV
completing that task.
Love to watch it.
We have to, before we move on from this roadblock, we have to address the fact that, yes, I did ask Gary and Ishwar what they were referencing because I was counting the columns underneath. That's exactly what the clue specified. And they weren't referencing the columns underneath. They were looking out into the open field and finding little markers to reference when they got back to the top. I could see what they were doing. And I think something about me is I asked that question because I needed validation in my thought process of like, this is what I think they're doing, but I need to know for sure. I do appreciate the little nudge from Gary and Ishwar.
There's a huge disadvantage to being the first one to any challenge on The Amazing Race because you can't.
It's a learning curve.
It's a huge learning curve. And once you learn it, other teams are able to look and see it from an outsider's perspective. Like, what are they doing? And I think when Gary got the first person, that's when everyone else started to like, okay, what did Gary do? And I think because you had been so frustrated leading up to that moment, and then after Riley got his, you had been so frustrated that two people had gotten it. I think your frustration mainly came from, we had a huge lead. You were now frustrated because other teams were doing better than us. But in the same way, all of you started getting it after one was found. Like, the process that then happened after that is obviously Gary and D'Angelo beasted through that. Madison and Riley beasted through finding their three because they got the first two. And then you and Ishwar finally clicked that, like, oh, now 6 of them are taken. I can process of elimination, go here, here, and here with my 3. So, like, you wouldn't have been there much longer even if Gary didn't give you a hint, mainly because it became easier as teams went on. You saw Haley and KAYLYNN, they only had 3 spots to fill, so it was way easier to find 3 versus look through 18 different ones to then find 3. So it just became easier as teams went on, and like, you would have gotten it eventually. Like, it wouldn't have been much longer than what we were there for.
No, like, even
it was just that massive level of like stress, anxiety, frustration in the first like 45 minutes.
Only because we lost our lead. Like,
Yeah.
I messed that up for us, and because I kicked my ass into high gear, we were able to leave third. So we went from first to third after this roadblock, but it is what it is.
I want to say we left 15 minutes after Gary and D'Angelo finished that task. And by that point, we still hadn't seen Haley and KAYLYNN by the time we were leaving. And so it started to click in our brains like, oh, they're lost, or something happened. They're not able to do the challenge because everybody else was there while we were there doing the Turban Challenge. We leave. We then have to go to
The Charminar,
which is
honestly,
an iconic structure.
And when we were in our rickshaw going there, it felt like a long drive. So the whole time I'm asking our driver, are we going the right way? Like, what's going on? But it was just because of how congested the streets were that it just made it a longer trip to get to the Charminar. And then, of course, when we get there, it's completely packed. It's a bazaar. So many different types of vendors, people crowding the streets, auto rickshaws parked everywhere. So finding the clue box was definitely a challenge in and of its own. But I think because Gary and D'Angelo and Madison and Riley had already gotten to there was a crowd kind of circled around it, which was easy to point out and say, that's where we've got to go. And we ripped open that clue, and it was a detour, but it was very vague. It was just this.
It was this or that. And we chose this not for any particular reason, just because it was the first option. And this is way more funny, I guess, than that.
Yes and no. I mean, if you watch the bonus footage again on the Amazing Race YouTube channel, there is a clip of us explaining why we chose this, and it's because on our clue there was an address for this or that, and they looked up this and it said something about perfumes, or was an area where there could have been a perfume vendor. So we were like, oh, this could be fun, this will be an enjoyable task. So we didn't think it had anything to do with the Bengals, but it was still a fun challenge.
It wasn't too far from the actual clue box. It was just right around the corner. And again, there were so many people watching this clue box that when we ripped it open, everybody wanted to know what it said. And it was very easy to ask somebody, can you look up this address for us?
Exactly.
So it was very easy to kind of, get some details to then choose this. Run down that alleyway. You had to go find the cart of bangles, push it up to the correct store, look at the beautiful bride's arm to see what bangles she had, and then also match the 7 bangles from your bin to her other wrist, so she had a perfect pair.
Sure, it seemed daunting at first because the cart was filled with so many options, but we only had to find 7 of them, and they were all different shapes and sizes. And I think because they were different shapes and sizes, it was easy for us to kind of pick up some and ring them around our fingers in an organized fashion to help us narrow down our search to get the correct matches. And I honestly don't think we were there for more than 15 minutes. Maybe 20.
Max 30. When we're going through the bangles, we had pushed all of them to one side of our cart so that we could look at them and move them to one side to be like, these are the discards, going from one side to the other. Big ones, easy. Medium ones, okay. The smaller ones were very hard because there were so many of the smaller ones, but our colors that we chose were very prominent. And there was a couple decoys in there that had one of the colors you had to choose, but the other color was not. So you would see it, recognize that this isn't correct, put it to the side, and then keep going. So there was a lot of process of elimination, and all you had to do was kind of filter through them one by one by one. And because we went so fast, I want to say we left within like less than 5 minutes of Gary and D'Angelo to then follow them to find a rickshaw to go to the palace. Like, we watched and followed them that entire time to the palace.
My only regret was not taking a bangle. Like, I really wish that I would have. Even if it didn't, like, fit over my wrist, it would have just been, like, a nice memento for the MEGALEG.
I know. They didn't fit over... Did they fit over your wrist?
I think maybe 1 or 2 could have.
Maybe
I tried it while we were doing the challenge.
There was no way.
No.
There was no way they were going to fit over my wrist.
It just would have been nice to have, like a little keepsake. When we complete this part of the detour, we make our way to the palace, which was honestly probably my favorite part of the entire MEGALEG. The moment we pulled up, you could not help but be just completely awestruck to how massive the palace was and all the intricate details of the architecture. Crossing through the gate and then putting on our costumes, like, and being transported into royalty was so... I loved it. I couldn't get enough of it.
Fun fact, when we were changing into our outfits, we actually changed...
Practically at the same time as Gary and D'Angelo. We were all in that dressing room together.
So, the funny thing about Gary and I's pants. Somehow, Gary and I switched pants, and he is wearing mine, which are obviously a different size than his because his legs are just massive. And I have Gary's pants, and they are just huge. I can't even get them to stay up. I'm pulling them up the entire time we're in the palace. Like, I don't know how it happened, but we didn't figure out until after the leg that Gary and I had switched pants for the entire palace moment.
And I had the opposite, where I ended up with Gary's belt, and it wouldn't fit around my waist, and it didn't help keep my pants up. So luckily for us, though, we have
our belts.
Some keepsakes from the MEGALEG, which were our belts from our outfits. But we pick out the couple to join us on a carriage ride up to the palace, and this was like one of those moments, I know we've talked about it in our previous recaps, where you just kind of take a beat and soak up your surroundings, soak in the moment, be grateful and so appreciative for the experience and the fact that we're in India. It was just a really nice breather in the middle of the MEGALEG. As we got to the next clue box, the yield was there, and Madison and Riley yielded Haley and KAYLYNN as well. So we rip open our clue. It says, "Who wants to keep things straight?" We decide that it was probably best for me to do it just because I was still down a roadblock. And at this point, if I were to do it, we would then be even 4-4 moving on into the race. So I step into the position to do another roadblock. And when I read the details of this, I was very, very excited. And I wish they would have put a little bit of backstory as to what I do. But I am an event coordinator. I've been doing events in Los Angeles for 10 years now. So reading the description of what I was going to be doing, I was like, this is my task. I'm going to be totally in my element. I've done a lot of place settings before. I've folded napkins before. So walking into the palace, though, and having those rose petals thrown over us was so romantic and beautiful. And I mean, honestly, just even walking into the palace in general, it smelled like roses.
It was fantastic.
It was such a great smell.
Beautiful. It was so, oh my gosh, it was so cool.
But this was another task where you had no idea what I was doing. But I was in the dining room, and seeing how massive that table was insane. Like, to have a party there would be pretty cool. And I loved hearing the backstory from Phil in the episode, because we don't really get a lot of those tidbits when we're running the race. So it was really fun to hear just a little bit more history behind that dining room we were in. But I picked my place setting, and I immediately knew I had to match up everything verbatim. I learned how to fold my napkin, which was something I was fairly comfortable doing. And I started putting together my place settings on the table. I noticed the ruler fairly quickly. And from my experience of working in events, I knew that it was to measure out the actual distance of everything in your place setting. So there's that scene of me explaining I'm going to keep that information to myself. At this point, we all were tied for first place. And I knew that more than likely there was going to be a pit stop after this, so why not hold that little nugget of information until it's advantageous to share it?
Yeah.
And in the middle of me explaining, oh, there's a ruler, I'm going to keep this information to myself, Riley kind of beat me to the punch there and was like, oh, there's a ruler, and told me the distance. So it was just funny how that whole thing played out. And I just kind of played dumb and went along with it, but again, that's when those relationships definitely come in handy on The Amazing Race.
We made a very defined rule for us as a team of when we would provide information, and it was only when we were almost done with the task or knew that we were going to succeed at a task, then we would give information if we felt that we should, wanted to, whatever.
Because knowledge is power.
Yes.
Like, it really is power, and sometimes when you have that knowledge, you want to keep your cards close until it's the right moment to share it.
100%.
Or not share it.
From my perspective of, we couldn't see what y'all were doing. We could just see through the little window, like Ishwar looking through and like beep bopping in the window. Like, that's all we could see, and we couldn't see the table. We had no idea what it looked like, and this was the moment where I like stepped back and was like, oh, James is gonna kill this challenge. Like, he's not gonna fail in any way at this because A, you're an event coordinator, like you knew what you were doing, and regardless of you helping any other team or getting help from anybody, like there was no way you weren't gonna do that so fast. Like, it was just that challenge was made for you because,
and I knew it, and that's,
you know.
I knew it, and that's why I was like, I'm gonna keep this ruler detail to myself, because if we could pull out another first place finish, like, why the hell would you not?
Yeah.
So it was definitely no intention to like pull a fast one on Riley. I definitely would have shared that information with him.
Just maybe a little later.
But just a little later in the task. But, you know, he was gracious enough to tell me in the middle of me explaining the ruler.
You finished very soon after Riley did, and we ran up to the pit stop, got second place, and honestly was a sigh of relief that the day was over.
And
it was a long day.
We grooved out to the pit stop performers. It was a really fun moment with them, and Phil definitely asked us a lot of questions about the alliance and kind of what our thought process was with that. And I know we've touched on it on our previous recaps, but at the end of the day, like, the 3-team alliance is something that we kind of already wanted to make happen before we even stepped out of the starting line. Like, that was a strategy we wanted to utilize to our advantage. But now that we're down to 5 teams and going to Cambodia in the next episode, it's literally any team for themselves at this point, and it'll be very interesting to see what comes into play with that last final double U-turn.
All of us knew that the double U-turn was coming, and so when you have 5 teams that have worked together almost the entire race, who have helped each other back and forth, what are you gonna do? Like, you know it's gonna be used, because anybody, it's a free-for-all. Everybody's trying to get ahead now to stay in the race, just make it to the next leg of the race.
We hope that you guys are enjoying this season as much as we are, reliving it. And if you want more updates on us, be sure to follow us on social media at It's Will and James on Instagram. And we hope to keep the conversation going with all of you.